I mean, certainly insect declines have been driven by lots of things, including habitat loss of all those beautiful meadows we were just talking about. And a lot of that habitat loss has been to farming, to intensified farming, which is associated with lots of pesticide use. And we seem to have gone down a route of sort of industrial farming. You know, we all know roughly what I mean by that. Bigger fields, heavily mechanized, large monocultures of rather small number of crops, a very low crop diversity in the landscape, huge amounts of wheat and barley and oilseed rape and not much else. Yeah. Grown on a massive scale and treated with lots of fertilizers and lots of pesticides. And we've essentially made huge swathes of the countryside. 70% of Britain is farmed, pretty hostile to life. You know, those big fields that are sprayed with insecticides, fungicides, herbicides, molluscicides, not surprisingly, there's not much life in them apart from the crop. And I think in the long term, it's not sustainable. You know, the damage that industrial agriculture is doing on a global scale is phenomenal. It's contributes hugely to greenhouse gas emissions. We're seeing massive soil erosion around the world. Been some estimates saying, you know, we maybe have 50 or 60 years left before there's no soil left on the planet, which, you know, would be a major blow to feeding. Basically, we couldn't without soil. It's vital. And it's driving this massive decline in biodiversity, including declines in pollinators, which again, we need to pollinate the crops. So I think it's a dead end that we've gone down. And if we carry on down this kind of route of farming, then, you know, we're going to come to a sticky end. We need to be cleverer and find a sustainable way. You know, obviously we need to grow food. We need to grow a lot of it because there's a lot of people, but we absolutely have to do it in a way that's sustainable. You know, by definition, we can't carry on doing something indefinitely that's not sustainable. So just to say a bit more about the pesticides, this is something we've done a lot of research on at Sussex, particularly with regard to the impacts on bumblebees. And when we first started doing research on this, I was really shocked by the amount and number of different pesticides going on to UK fields. So, you know, it's just to throw some figures at you. UK arable farming uses 16.9 thousand tons of pesticides a year. And each field, on average, is treated about 17 times, usually with a few different insecticide applications, a whole bunch of fungicide applications, usually some herbicides, usually some slug pellets to kill the slugs and snails. You know, it's an absolute blizzard of chemicals, and any bee daring to visit that crop is being exposed to a whole cocktail of stuff, some of it, you know, insecticides designed to kill insects. So it's hardly surprising that pollinators and other insects are in decline, it seems to me. And I should say, actually, that figure of 17 applications per field, that's risen, it's nearly doubled in the last 25 years. So we're currently getting worse every year. And that's just farming use of pesticides. That doesn't account for gardeners. You know, you go to any garden centre and or even supermarkets these days, and there's a whole selection of pesticides on sale for you to chuck around in your garden, which I think is completely nuts. Yeah. And it doesn't include things like veterinary uses. It doesn't include ivermectins applied to get fed to cattle, which are essentially insecticides, which come out in the cow pats and then poison all the insects that would break down the cow poo, and so on and so on. Pretty much everywhere you go, and anything you choose to eat contains pesticides. So it's, you know, arguable about whether it's safe for us too. It's certainly true that there's a recent study that showed that 99.8% of German people are urinating glyphosate herbicide. It's not, you know, which if German people are doing it, then we're doing it too. You know, there's nothing special about what happens in Germany. So, you know, they're in breakfast cereal.
They would do it very efficiently, though. I'm sorry, they would do it probably more.
Very efficient urination, I'm sure. Yeah, absolutely. Without a sense of humour, but sorry, stereotyping. Yeah, so basically, you know, it's nuts, and you kind of can't help but think that 100 years from now, people will look back and say, "What on earth were we thinking of?" You know, that assuming there's anyone left in 100 years, they'll think that was just absolutely idiotic.
But can I stop you there? But haven't we got ourselves into this loop? So we're applying more and more chemicals, because in a way we feel we have to, because because we're destroying that biodiversity, because we're destroying the natural predators. So we've got to use the chemicals because there's no food web to
yeah. I mean, that it's true. It's a sort of vicious circle that obviously the pesticides do destroy, you know, the hoverflies, the lacewings, the ladybirds, the things that otherwise might have controlled the pests. And so the farmer, if he stops using the pesticides, can expect an outbreak of pests to happen because he hasn't got the natural enemies. And it would take probably a small number of years for the natural enemies to recover. And in the meantime, the farmer's going to lose crops. So it's quite hard to break out of. And also, every time you apply pesticides, they're slightly less effective than the time before because the pests evolve resistance. So farmers then apply more pesticides because they're not working so well. And that's something, you know, that we've seen over and over again, that the farmer has to apply more and more and more and keep switching to new chemicals because the old ones no longer work. And, you know, it's a kind of a treadmill. And it's also exacerbated by the companies that sell these things. They do their best to persuade farmers that they need them. And, so farmers are subjected to all this kind of marketing pressure from salesmen, including the agronomists that advise farmers on how to grow crops, most of whom actually are working on commission for pesticide companies. So, you know, it's not, I mean, it's difficult. It sounds like I'm having a real bash at farmers here, but it's not really farmers' fault that they've ended up where they are. You know, this whole farming model was supported by subsidies, by government policies, by the common agricultural policy, by the industries that make money out of it. And we don't give them much help. You know, we should be funding an independent advisory service to help farmers reduce pesticide use, to give them advice about how to use integrated pest management, which is a kind of approach to minimizing pesticide use. But without that kind of support and funding for research and so on, we shouldn't really be surprised if the farmers have been kind of railroaded into the system they're in. But we need to help them get out of it, basically.
But it can be achieved, because a few podcasts ago, I interviewed a farmer, Martin Lyons from the Nature Friendly Farming Network. I don't know if you've heard of it.
Yeah, I've met him.
Yeah, he's a great lad. So he farms 2 villages away, and he was saying that his yields have gone down slightly, but he makes a lot more profit because his inputs are lower. You know, and again, like you said, he's had to take a few years to build up the habitat and build up the biological controls, but it can be done.
Absolutely, and the messages like that, you know, we need to spread them, because, you know, I think a lot of farmers don't realise that there is an alternative route, and perhaps if, you know, they could be given the chance to go and look around Martin's farm and see it in action, because farmers listen to other farmers far more than they listen to scientists like me or anybody else, really. You know, if another farmer can say, look, you know, I've done it, it works, come and have a look, then they're much more likely to try it themselves.